How many of you feel today's consumer is distracted and addicted? Distracted and addicted. And it's a challenge. Just by round of applause, how many of you have a friend who sleeps with their phone? I'll rephrase. I don't feel like I was fair. How many of you have a friend who sleeps with their phone on their nightstand next to their bed? So if I hypothetically had a friend who slept with an open bottle of Mad Dog 2020 on his nightstand, does my friend have a drinking problem or just bad taste? All right, we'll talk a little bit today about a number of things, but the distracted and addicted consumer is definitely a challenge for each of you, because the truth is, before I buy, I have the opportunity to get on here while I'm shopping in your store and look at your direct and indirect competitors, look at your ratings and reviews, and decide whether you're sharing things that are truthful or not as a brand, and then make a choice. And it's not so easy when that's in the palm of my hand. This is not a phone. I don't know any millennials who are actually calling you back. Forget that idea, all right? So I will take a minute to level set on generations from a birth year lens, but it's not where I want to focus our energy. From a birth year lens, people who are born in different birth years sometimes have, I'll say, common thematic feelings. For example, my father, who's older, could tell you exactly where he was when John F. Kennedy was killed. And I have absolutely no frame of reference for that. Some of you have absolutely no idea that he was a past president of the United States. It's fine. The point of the matter is, generations are not homogeneous cohorts, and the myths about generations will slow you down. Not all millennials are broke, unemployed, living in their parents' basements among a collection of participation trophies that they've never freaking earned. It's not accurate. It's not a great win for brand loyalty to think about them through that lens. And so I want to move past birth years and start to dive in deeper. When it comes to millennials, a lot of them are starting families. More than 10,000 women today are going to have a child. More than 90% of those women are millennials by birth year. The fastest growing group of affluent millennials, or affluents in general in this country, are millennial women over the age of 30. 1 in 4 stay-at-home parents today is a dad, right? I mean, that is the way it is. My daughter's engaged, and I asked her, and she's made it abundantly clear when she graduates from med school, they'll start a family at some point, and he will be the stay-at-home parent. That is the way it's going to be. They've already discussed it, right? So family dynamics are wildly different. You've probably recognized this family. It's chaos theory for some of you. It's reality for others. The modern family does not work the way hierarchical families worked. The caveman model, where the man went out, killed something, brought it back to the cave, and then we all dined on what he provided, has sort of ended. Unfortunately, not everyone has seen that ending so clearly. And so I would encourage you to either watch the show or read my book, depending on what you'd enjoy more. You recognize this fella? Okay, a few of you are like thinking, I went to Facebook and I found your gym teacher from like maybe 8th grade or something like that. Nope, Abraham Maslow. Everyone familiar with Maslow? All right, Maslow was a sort of classic 1940s thinker. Bottom of the pyramid, food, water, shelter. Top of the pyramid, self-actualization. Maslow didn't understand modern consumer culture, wasn't tapped into Fortnite. For that matter, we all know if we're working on a global basis in the absence of Wi-Fi, we have no chance. Trying to restrict consumers while they're shopping or not giving them the experience they want isn't going to win for you. I do want to take a little time and talk about Gen Z. I know a few of you are feeling like I'm really confused about Gen Z because Gen Z, sort of late teens, a few of them are creeping into their early 20s. And this particular image doesn't do justice to Gen Z, but it does from a mindset standpoint. And I'm going to talk about mindset quite a bit because what we found when we studied youth culture, and we've been studying it since 2010, when I got the chance to lead a study with Boston Consulting Group, Barclay, and Service Management Group, and published our findings ahead of Pew's first work on millennials as consumers. What we find is a canary in the coal mine effect. Whether you're in fashion, whether you're in health, whether you're in fitness, I don't care where you live in terms of a category. What we usually see is youth culture as the canary in the coal mine on trends. Young people are 2.5 times more likely to be early adopters, to sample. Sometimes we say they're disloyal, not fair. They're trying new things that are more useful. And what we find is what I'll call almost a Starbucks effect, which is everyone can follow along. You could go to most Starbucks in the country this morning and watch the 50-year-old men and women come in, not say a word, take their coffee, and walk out. It's mobile pay. It didn't start with the 50-year-olds who are grabbing their coffee and walking out. It started with young people. They were the early adopters. The first thing we found in our research on Gen Z, and probably the biggest thing to think about longitudinally, old souls and young bodies, digital, social, mobile to the bone, more so than millennials, and yet they appear to look and feel in terms of attitudes more like folks who are probably in their 50s and 60s. So that's going to create some challenges for those of us who think they're the same as the last generation of young people. Second, from a brand standpoint, they're looking for brand proof. And we could talk about brand proof at length. I'm going to take a minute or two. First of all, my generation started nothing in the way of action, right? Like, we didn't protest things. We didn't go out and start movements. This generation has started movement after movement, conversation after conversation at a very young age. We could have a conversation on gun policy. They started a massive movement on the topic. I don't know why I would want to do that. Half of you might agree with me, half of you might disagree. Of those who disagree, 15% are like concealed carry. So why do I want to really argue with you this morning knowing that? But what do we see from a brand standpoint? When that conversation started, there were about a dozen companies who had contractual partnerships with the NRA, and all of them terminated those partnerships. These are multi-million dollar deals, tens of millions of dollars, and they're contractually required, yet they terminated because the impact to brand would be greater than the impact of terminating a contract illegally. So why do I talk about this? Because if I wanted to look at where brands fail, we could look at Gillette. Now, I haven't consulted with Gillette, and some of you might disagree that they failed, but this year they took brand action on the topic of masculinity. We have a not public-facing study on masculinity. I looked at the research. They were on strategy. No brand could have been more on strategy than Gillette. Why did they fail? Because they don't understand brand proof. Brand proof means you communicate to internal stakeholders and you provide evidence externally before you run Super Bowl ads and offend millions of female consumers over a pink tax and get it all wrong, right? And this isn't my opinion. You can Google search the topic, or you could maybe use Conversocial and see what the social conversation was on the topic. But Gillette got it wrong. Big brands often get it wrong when they don't understand sequencing. It's not just strategy. Millennials were all about collaboration. Gen Z is going to bring competition back into the conversation. They are future-focused, they are thinking about how to win, and they are entering the workforce and entering your world as consumers in droves. Millennials were all about social. In fairness, they were the first generation to sort of come of age in social. Thank God for me, when I was in my beer pong competing sort of era, there was no social, so there are no pictures, right? Or I wouldn't be up here today. Gen Z has a different view in terms of social. There are two rules of the road. First, they have to trust your brand. Second, there has to be a quid pro quo in their favor on data, and they understand it. If they don't trust your brand, forget it. And if there isn't a quid pro quo in favor of them, again, forget it. You have to meet both requirements. Millennials forced companies to reimagine things around environment. The word of the day was go paperless, and companies really looked hard at the environmental footprint. It's still a major topic today. Gen Z has a different topic. That topic will be around the topic of equality. In fact, when we think about brand authority and we think about retail, we could look to Nike, who has editorial authority on this topic. They've been supporting Paralympic athletes for years. They've been doing all kinds of things. And so when they decided to sign Colin Kaepernick, I could argue it wasn't a surprise. In fact, if you've read Marketing to Gen Z, we actually argued in favor of this a year before the signing. Didn't see the actual signing. Just in terms of, do you understand your brand's editorial authority in a world where consumers align to brands based on values? Okay? Millennials were given sort of a short stick in terms of no attention spans, low attention spans. We all have low attention spans. And now there's a meme going around, if you've been to conferences, that Gen Z has the attention span of a goldfish. 6 seconds. You've heard it. It's absurd. Just-in-time retail shoppers demand just-in-time content. If you're not getting the result you need with your content, then look in the mirror, take a half step back and say, you know what? We need to think differently. How many of you use portfolio theory when it comes to content strategy? Literally. Think about your portfolio and make bets based on various outcomes the same way you would if you were running a sophisticated fund company. You wouldn't make all your bets on US microcap stocks. You shouldn't do that with content. So content demand is increasing. If you're not seeing what you want, don't buy the goldfish meme. Now I'm going to pause and talk about mindset a bit through the lens of love. Everyone in the room kind of familiar with the concept of love? By a round of applause, do you have someone in your life you love? Okay, great. So everyone's familiar, I'm glad. So consumers start by dating your brand. It was raining in New York on Sunday. I went shopping. I went to Allbirds for my first time. It was crazy packed, and I still felt like I got an amazing guest experience. No one on the planet needs shoes less than me, and I bought 2 pair, full price. The store was packed, and I still felt like I was getting attention. That was a dating experience. That was my first date. And if I have another good date, I go on a second date and a third date and a fourth date. Consumers date your brand until they decide they love your brand. And then if they love your brand, they're going to show some loyalty. Now the challenge for you is you need consistency and spontaneity to win at love. Now I've heard surprise and delight at conferences. I don't buy it. Consumers don't usually like surprise. The delight part, I'm good with. So consistency and spontaneity drive love. Simple example. Let's say I'm smart enough tonight to take my date to her favorite restaurant here in New York City. And let's say I'm extra smart and I bring her her favorite chocolates, her favorite flowers, and her favorite Hallmark greeting card. Now I've got my act together. I'm on my date. It's my first date. Things are going great. Now, let's say I go to the same restaurant 100 nights in a row. Same flowers and chocolate. How much spontaneity am I getting in this? 100 nights in a row. And how many of you as retailers, 100 times in a row, want to deliver the exact same guest experience and expect the consumer to have the same excitement? There's a law of diminishing marginal returns, and we're all familiar with it. So love is tricky, and it's hard because consumers have so many direct and indirect alternatives. We decided to dissect the issue. We actually started working with some large brands across categories, and we own the non-client brand data, which we aggregated. We wanted to look at the financial impact of love, because contrary to what your mom or dad might have told you, there is a connection between love and money when it comes to brands, all right? When it comes to brands, the most loved brands build emotional connections, and they get a price elasticity and a frequency of use advantage. And price elasticity and frequency of use are often confused with the term loyalty. Most of us don't want loyalty if it means less margin and more frequency, right? That's not the goal. So we looked at consumers 16 to 65, and we were looking at derived and stated importance. Now, stated is what I said. I said I was going to be healthy on this trip. How many of you actually think I made it to the gym this morning? Don't answer that question, okay? And there was some bacon available when I was eating breakfast at my hotel. So stated and derived. Stated is what I said. Derived is how I spend my money. We wanted to separate stated from derived with consumers 16 to 65 in order to understand brand love, all right? What we found on average was 75% of financial performance was related to pricing strategy, distribution strategy, macro factors. On average, 75%. If you compete on low price, it's probably between 80 and 87% price and distribution. What's your price and distribution strategy? If you compete on differentiation, it's probably more like 65 to 70% price and distribution. Price and distribution still matter, but brand preference becomes so much more important, okay? And loved brands have such a big advantage. Such a big advantage. So we found 6 factors that drove brand preference across the consumer set 16 to 65. Now, obviously there are differences by category, and there are a lot of different categories in the room, and I'm not looking at any individual brand in here saying this is exactly what we saw. We did this because a lot of brands already have good research on the consumer, and we were trying to do gap analysis to understand what gaps companies could close to drive growth. For example, you're all familiar with Tom Shoes? Everyone in the room. What's Tom famous for? Donating shoes, specifically, buy one, give one. So what kind of gap would Tom Shoes have on buy one, give one? 0. So how much incremental growth could you get if you were running the Tom Shoes brand and your strategy was to drive awareness on buy one, give one? Not much. I don't work with Tom Shoes, but Tom Shoes would have a lot more success if they had a gap on, let's say, fit or fashionability. Then they could have more shoes in her closet. So understanding gaps is crucial. And this strategy was based on understanding gaps, okay? So I'm going to deconstruct what we learned about those 6 factors, starting with social circle. It does not say social media. Social circle is cultural conversation. Is your brand part of cultural conversation? Simple example. I live in a suburb of Kansas City. I'm at a cocktail party. It's Saturday night, and people are talking about a grocery store, and I am like a fish out of water. I have no idea how to participate in this conversation. We're talking about grocery stores on a Saturday night over cocktails. Doesn't make sense to me. Why? Because a brand called Trader Joe's was about a mile away, and they were getting ready. They were in a couple-week window of opening their store in this geography. And that brand gets word of mouth and word of mouse. And word of mouth are valuable, and you know that already. And why did I bring up Nike earlier in this conversation and the topic of brand editorial authority? Because what starts a social circle conversation, what drives a lot of profitable EBITDA growth for brands is when you're in those cultural conversations. And there are not that many high-performing brands that don't have exceptional social circles. So if you don't know what your brand potential is and where your performance is, then you don't know what kind of gap you can close. Now I want to share a simple example. We're working with a company called Wingstop, and they have a lot of consumers who are sort of, I'll call them male 19-year-old consumer, all right? We obviously know a lot more about our consumer than this, okay? Just talking about generally Wingstop. If you haven't heard of it, they're probably one of the fastest growing fast casual restaurants, so they would compete with brands like Chipotle. How many familiar with Wingstop? All right, great. How many are familiar with a holiday called 420? 420. Okay, so it's not a Hallmark holiday, and our client is definitely a belt and suspender kind of client, but their consumer is not a belt and suspender kind of consumer. Their consumer is celebrating on 420, and 420 is a holiday. It's not a Hallmark holiday. It's a holiday for people who get high. And we see a ton of social conversation going around ahead of 420, and we're monitoring the conversation. What we see is our brand coming up a lot. And it's coming up a lot around the fact how awesome it would be to have Wingstop on 420. So we quickly huddle and develop content designed to be found. So we're buying media in binge-watched programming. And as the day goes on, the content changes. And if you're a binge watcher and you're getting stoned, here's what you find.
Let's all go to the Wingstop. Let's all go to the Wingstop. Let's all go to the Wingstop to grab ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the Wingstop.
Keep it together, Cup. So hungry. And just one fry. Whose voice is that?
Let's all go to the Wingstop. Let's all go to the Wingstop. Let's all go to the Wingstop to grab ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the just got back from the Wingstop. Just got.
All right, so cultural conversations. number one. Number two of the 6 that I listed, and they're clearly interconnected, is self. Self is the emotional connection consumers have with a brand. Consumers don't walk down grocery stores with a list in their hand of all the cereal choices that has cereal A, price per ounce, and a flavor score. And they don't multiply the price per ounce times the flavor score to make choices. And they don't do that with your brands either. Certainly functional benefits matter, but emotional decisions usually drive the day, and they drive the price elasticity and other factors we see. In fact, on that same shopping trip, when I went downtown on Sunday, it was wet, I decided to wander around. I found Glossier. Now, I've never been to Glossier. I'm a little bit claustrophobic. I was only in the store for about 3 minutes. And I started perspiring because they don't have anything for me to buy, and there are like 500 women in a store about as big as this stage. And they seem to be really happy buying things. Okay, so I'm guessing they sort of built an Instagram community with a strong emotional connection, and I imagine the vast majority of you who compete directly or indirectly are wildly familiar with Glossier. And they don't have any magic that you probably don't have from a product standpoint. But they certainly have some magic in terms of retail, because I couldn't imagine a more crowded store on a rainy Sunday in New York than that store downtown in the middle of nowhere. All right. Third on the list is innovation. Now, innovation is complicated, and I'm going to give you my personal definition. It's long. You might want to write it down. It's the following: the useful new. Period, paragraph, end of discussion. The useful new. You could be from Lowe's or Home Depot and be more useful by giving me content to inspire me to take on a project. You could be with any number of brands. I didn't say it was around product. It could be on the experience before. It could be on the experience during. It could be on the experience after I'm shopping. But consumers are looking for usefulness, and retailers who are struggling probably have a gap on innovation. Whether it's real or perceived is probably irrelevant. It's how consumers see it. And so the brands that are winning on innovation have an edge. They have an edge with both consumers and employees. And let's not minimize the importance of the second thing I brought into that conversation, and that's employees. Because my impression of Allbirds is based on a bunch of young people who I met for the first time. I've never met the CEO of Allbirds, okay? Now, when it comes to innovation, again, I'm going to use portfolio theory. Sustaining and disruptive should be in your portfolio. And it's rare where companies do both well. One of the big projects we did for a big company here in New York, not more than a block or two from here, big building, was a disruptive project. The assignment was quite simple. We want you to come up with a strategy to put us out of business. We're a $10 billion company. We are wildly profitable. You can see everything you need to see. We're publicly traded. I have a team working on sustaining. We met the team. We gave them consumer insights. Your job is to come up with ideas that make that team throw up. And you have 90 days to do it. It was a great project. The challenge is to separate the portfolio. Disruptive and innovation disruptive and sustaining don't usually play nicely together. First of all, you need to have a financial model that's separated. You can't use the same ROI and the same rules of the road on bringing sustaining to market as you do for disruptive. For disruptive, there are 2 questions you have to ask and answer. First question, consistent with your brand authority. Second question, can I afford to make the bet? Since I picked on Gillette earlier, I'll do it again. Haven't worked with Gillette. Guarantee you that there were ideas floating around on deck after deck. Many of you have probably seen the movie that were rejected 17 times, 2 to 3 years before anything called Dollar Shave Club ever existed. Channel conflict, pricing conflict, product conflict, retail conflict, blah, blah, blah. Consumers don't care. You got to separate your portfolios, you got to have insights, and you got to act on those insights, which could vary by day of week, could vary by need states that are very different. We could have a long conversation about what that looks like. Since I don't think I have a lot of grocery retailers in the room, and it's barbecue season, most of you would need a raincoat. I'm sure there are plenty of retailers here who will sell you one if you were sitting by me having some watermelon, because I'm pretty messy as an eater. And yet these retail grocers haven't figured out it's entirely consistent with their brand authority to come up with other ways to sell this exact product. I don't get it. In fact, if I were to look at the biggest theme in terms of need states that most companies miss that we see in our research is how you think about simplification. The useful new. Simplification is a need state we see again and again and again. I'm still in the grocery store. If you were running a grocery store, and none of us probably are, which is why I've picked this so I won't offend anyone this morning, you know that the profit is made on meat and fish sales, and it's grilling season. Yet today's average consumer has a spice cabinet that looks like this. How many of these grocery store leaders are in homes doing ethnography, thinking about the fact that I'm not selling them spices at the same rate I do older consumers? Yet they want to make things that are an adventure. Here are my Korean tacos I found online. It'll only cost $31 to make them. Low interest financing available for me? No. How many people are going to spend $31 to make this dish for one or two people? Not going to happen. So I have too many indirect alternatives. What am I going to do? If I'm innovating and I'm that grocery store, I'm selling you single serve spice and it's free when you buy the fish and the meat, the super premium products in my store. It's free because I know your spice cabinet's empty and I know you want a flavor adventure and I have to solve that need state. And if that kind of thinking isn't going inside your organization, then you got a challenge. And by the way, you'd have to rotate this on a day-part basis because Saturday looks different than Monday. It just does. All right. I also decided to look at some sustaining, and this is a simple thing. So I go to Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever I go to get things. It's spring. It's time for me to take on projects. I got to tell you, shopping those stores, if you're not very handy and not very regular, and I'm not, I'm an infrequent buyer, okay, just because I don't do that many projects, is scary. But I applaud them because they actually understand that when I walk in the store, I'm intimidated, which allows me to get over it before I walk in. Not a big, crazy idea. On the sustaining roadmap, a simple thing, and you got to have both. All right, trust was fourth on the list. You can write down trust trap in your notes. For most brands, it's real simple. You either got it or you don't. And if you don't, you can't win by advertising your way out of a trust problem. It just doesn't work. And when you look at the data, for most brands, not all, communicating messaging around trust through traditional forms of communication will generate zero incremental EBITDA, and I did say zero for most brands. So the challenge is, how do you take action in favor of trust? Action is important. And I think you heard stories of some of that yesterday. I heard the Shinola story, and it's like action, right? Not communication around trust. FedEx is a classic example of a brand built on trust, and you can give it away fast. If you were in the airline sector, and none of you were, thank goodness you're not running Southwest Airlines. I can almost guarantee you that you're going to run into delays, and I can almost guarantee you that the Wi-Fi won't work because it doesn't work on the whole system. Just ask the pilots. They'll tell you it's terrible. Their employees are talking about it, right? So trust is tricky. Your employees got to breathe it. Your employees got to understand it. They got to deliver it. Don't try to advertise your way out of a trust challenge. Fifth is accessible. Accessible isn't about useful or convenient. The key word on that page is hyper. Hyper useful, hyper convenient. The brands that are disintermediating are being hyper useful and hyper convenient. I've got a couple team members here in New York that are have been doing work for a little company in Seattle for about 7 years. There is no little company in Seattle willing to give up more equity in an old schema faster than any of you. And the challenge usually is around giving up equity you have in your old schema. What does the consumer demand in terms of hyper useful and hyper convenient? I suspect you're familiar with this one, right? Has everyone heard about Casper? Kind of a sleepy company, all bad puns intended, right? This is an industry that hasn't moved a whole lot in a long time, and yet they come on the scene with a direct-to-consumer model, 100-day guarantee. I love the Insomnibot. It's really mostly active after 11 at night, which is perfectly within their editorial authority, right? They've looked at the basic shopping model of a consumer, and they're bringing something to the table that's completely different. And I promise everyone in the category had the option to do it and said, we have so much equity in our retail model, we're not going to. So we'll just give that business away to someone else. Not a good decision. Last but not least is purpose. And I do have a new book coming out called The Purpose Advantage. It's coming out in September. And we have looked at this topic upside down and backwards. What we have seen in general If you get credit for your purpose, big if, you will get a 10 to 13% price premium at retail. 10 to 13%. How many of you would love to get some piece of that across your portfolio of existing sales? And so today's values-driven consumer, if I want to use Forrester's language, often has a choice of brands where the differences are really small. The price gap is really not meaningful. The quality difference is not significant. So when your values align to their values, you have a chance to win. Now this is tricky because you can be called out for being a phony in a heartbeat. So you really have to think about what you're doing on a longitudinal basis and have a plan that your senior leadership is bought into, or you'd better off not trying to go down this road. But when we look at a lot of the emerging winners at retail, I think this is part of the DNA. In fact, I had a chance to meet with the co-founders of Bombas on Monday just to kind of get acquainted. You know, if somebody said retail is slow, they couldn't see it. They can't keep up practically. It's so busy down there. And so is their business fundamentally different than your business? Yeah, it's a purpose-driven business model. And it's a direct-to-consumer model where they're moving with the consumer and they're listening to the consumer better than most in their category. And when we see successful purpose-driven brands, they have real advantages. The first advantage I mentioned is a price elasticity advantage. Tide is probably one of the largest, most ubiquitous brands on the planet. It's a multi-billion-dollar brand. There's a company across the river called Unilever that has a brand called Seventh Generation that is taking share from this large brand at a 10% price premium on shelf. Walk into any Walmart, Target, or wherever you want to shop and take pictures yourself. I did it. So the consumer has to assume you can clean well, and they have to assume it's safe. That's price of admission. Price of admission in the category is cleanliness and safe. If I don't buy that, I don't buy the product. Now it gets down to the fact that someone's paying a 10% premium at shelf for a brand that they trust, that they believe in. So as you think about purpose as a pretty complicated subject, if any of you want a pre-read, we actually have a full-blown workshop. I'm happy to send it to you. I don't have time to cover it, where you can look at whether you're going down the right road or the wrong road, and you can assess what you would need to do to take action in favor of getting down the right road. Oops. I do want to make one final point as it comes to purpose, and that is it usually starts right inside your company. You have to have employees who absolutely believe it and feel it, and that means often giving up things you're doing in favor of new things. We have a program we still do. It's Bring Your Kid to Work Day. We got a lot of 30, 35-year-old women with like 1-year-old kids. How awesome would it be if you were like a 30-year-old woman with a 1-year-old kid to have Bring Your Kid to Work Day as part of your company? You know, bring that 1-year-old into the office. Sound pretty awesome? No. No. Sucks. And we know it sucks. Okay? So we said we need to create something different. Our employees are excited about what they do. Why don't we create Bring Your Parent to Work Day? I mean, we're talking about all the things we're doing as a company, and they all have parents that they'd love to get introduced to the company. Why don't we create something around that? It doesn't really cost anything. It's just about thinking differently. So let me introduce you to Bring Your Parent to Work Day.
I'm not sure why he chose advertising.
I think advertising chose him.
My husband laughs all the time. He said that she goes to work and does Facebook basically all day long. So,
and I'll say, what did you do today? And it usually just sounds like he's eating out or editing video.
If you walk through the door, there's all these people sitting around a table, and then you got the main person up there pitching or whatever, and I'm thinking maybe he's does some of that.
Can we revisit just the strategy first? You know, what led to taking this approach?
Go ahead.
Has anybody ever experienced virtual reality?
Oh, you guys. Oh, Dick, you should see this, honestly. Oh my gosh, I'm falling.
Welcome, moms, to the Social Command Center at Barclay. I needed to grab some Wingstop. I heard it's on fleek 100. Dank is like a term they use that say, like, this is a good, high-quality thing. And it comes from weed culture for that.
Oh. Like it's dope, it's good, it's like whatever. Dank.
How heavily are you ingrained in the weed culture?
Not heavily. I just think the whole concept is crazy. Why not just email somebody, right? No.
Spirit Airlines, how can we make a 4th of July themed email a little bit weird?
What about the founding mothers? You know, they never get mentioned.
Yes. So we've started to paint this picture. Our founding fathers are promiscuous fellows.
Oh, look at this. Oh, my word. I'm glad I went to the restroom.
No body hair. Some off of the legs a little bit. He's a pretty hairy guy. Some on the happy trail.
This is an easy one to wrap up. We have the founding fathers got around, and so can you. I think this is a solid email. I'm gonna type it up so we don't forget it. I'm putting that in for July 4th.
There is an abundance of creativity. It just emanates from the walls of the place and from the people. And so I'm just tickled pink that I got to be here, and I hope I get a chance to come back again sometime.
I think the energy is amazing. You know, for a mom to see her son, just to see him thrive in an environment is so rewarding.
I love knowing you all, knowing he's with people like you all. That's so cool.
I just know she's awesome, and that was just an affirmation.
I learned that I'm really proud. I'm really glad that you're doing what you love with really cool people. Sorry.
You're making me cry.
Each of you has a chance to inspire consumers who are absolutely shopping at retail. And if you're not getting the result that you want, it's not because consumers aren't interested in retail. It's because there are other companies willing to look at their need states and change faster than you've been willing to change in the past. And that shouldn't slow you down in the future. I hope some of the suggestions I provided are helpful. They're all based on hard data. If you are interested in that purpose workshop, which is in the book, I'm happy to share it ahead of the book release. You won't get it when you download this file. You'll only get today's presentation. So thank you for including me, and I appreciate your attention.